Thanks, Jeff, very much, and good afternoon, actually, from Nova Scotia. Hope everybody's doing well and is being safe in their homes. So yeah, Jeff, if you just want to slip to the next slide. My experience is obviously with traveling internationally, and it started in 2015 when I had the opportunity to represent Canada. And then I've just been given more opportunities to do so, and feel honored, in fact, to be able to be entrusted with other people's children, and then also to represent Canada in another country. So it's been a really phenomenal experience, lots and lots of highs and funs, and some challenges along the way. So that's just a little bit about me. I should also add, although it's not there, I'm a middle school teacher full-time as well, teach grade 7, but I'm taking this year off, thankfully, and so I'm able to do things like this. So we'll just move right on. Jeff, please. Just before we get started, at any time if you have a question, by all means, ask away. I put it at the end, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can't ask it whenever. It's pretty self-explanatory. I'll just kind of walk you through some of the things that I've learned by being able to coach with other coaches as well, and things that I've been able to put into place for my own teams that are here in Nova Scotia. So obviously we'll do what happens before, what happens during, after, and at any time just stop me and ask questions. Okay, first slide. I feel so bossy telling you what to do, Jeff, sorry. So there's lots and lots that happens before we even go, before a team's even picked, although that's definitely an important piece, of course. Knowing what Squash Canada has in their budget is really important, because obviously it determines if we have a training camp and where that training camp is. Tournament fees are pretty straightforward. The accommodations, depending on the country, could be very expensive or very inexpensive. And then there's also an opportunity for athletes, once they're chosen or have earned the right to go, then they can contribute as well. So we need to know what we're working with, and then we can make some decisions from there. The obvious things like travel information, we gather that as we go, again, depending on where the training camp is. So last summer, as an example, we went to Malaysia, and we had 12 athletes going with us. So we needed a lot of information, and we had to make some decisions about where we were going to do our training camp. So lots of information had to come from parents and kids. And then, of course, once we figured out who was going, we need to get all of their information, not only their personal information of medical and dietary, but also their international and national match histories and their own head-to-head, so that we could do the best we could in our coaching. And of course, some of their coaching preferences and expectations, as well as individual goals. So we had a lot of communication going back and forth, mostly through emails about this kind of thing, getting it organized, and then through Squash Canada as well, having them facilitate some of that information, certainly the travel information, but also the team uniforms, figuring out what everyone's size is, and getting that sorted. And then who brings them? I had the task of bringing almost everyone's uniform to Malaysia, so my bag was pretty full, but then making sure that that's all coordinated. The fun part at the end of a closing ceremony for an international games is making sure that we're all coordinated, and you'll see a picture in a minute. So we had a lot of conversation around what everybody's going to wear on that last closing ceremony. So that team outfit coordination is pretty important. And of course, we had to make sure we had flags and if there was a mascot. Really important as well to think about some of the gifts to give people who we feel really helped us out. We took a lot of maple syrup with us, as well as bought some thank you cards, because invariably there's always 2 or 3 people that really stand out in the host city or the host venue who go above and beyond, and so we want to make sure that Canada thanks them So we have to make sure we have that before we go as well. Any questions around that? Maybe, maybe not. So the next slide is just a picture of our opening ceremonies uniform from Malaysia. You can see there's quite a crew of us. All but one of the boys is there in the top left. And our closing uniform, the girls coordinated their dresses, and I tried to find something. And as you can see, Jonathan's got a red tie there. So very important to look good. And we did, we looked good. And that was a lot of fun. Next slide. So that's what we needed to, what we needed before we went. This is what we needed to do, obviously, before we left. So we created a team newsletter that includes a lot of the information I'm about to share with you now, and I'll give you in the next slide, not yet, but in the next slide I'll show you the table of contents. But a newsletter was really important, just to kind of make sure everybody knew all the information, and it was created for the team, but also all the family members. And it included all kinds of things that you'll see in a minute in the table of contents. And we needed to create that. It was a fairly lengthy document. We also needed to review, obviously, all of the players' and officials' handbooks, any rules and regulations that were new. So the World Anti-Doping Association, their rules, all the accommodations that were there, anything that was tournament related. We had to make sure that we were very knowledgeable about that, and some of that got included in the newsletter. Of course, understanding the host country, and the Netherlands had very different norms than Malaysia. Brazil had different norms as well, so just understanding some of the norms and the customs, as well as some of the language. My Spanish and Portuguese is not that good when I went to Brazil, but and of course some of the things to visit and some of the things not to visit, to make sure that kids were aware, and of course understanding the currency as well. The training camps, so for the World Juniors, we did, the first two, we did training camps in Canada. We got together in Toronto for the Netherlands. We got together in Vancouver before we went to New Zealand. And we had a sort of a bit of a training camp there, which was really good to get to know the players, and the players get to know the athlete, or the coaches, coaching staff. We obviously opted to have a training camp in Malaysia last year, which was excellent because there was such a big group of kids. So it gave us an opportunity to obviously get over the time change, but the climate was crazy hot. And so it gave us an opportunity to get used to the heat. And again, get to know these kids, and for them to get to know us, and get a sense of what we're about, and start to have conversations around goals and that sort of thing. So that the training camp is, I think, is a critical part of the whole experience, because it just makes everybody sort of get on the same page. And then, of course, what we needed to do is make sure we knew all the social media sites that Squash Canada wants us to make sure that we keep up to date, and if there's that we can send through to Squash Canada, and of course the communication, best lines of communication with parents as well. So just the next slide, Jeff, just gives you, I just took a screenshot of the table of contents, and you can see it was quite an involved table of contents, and of course it looked different for the other games as well. So you can scoot right down to the juring, which is why we're going. In my experience, and this is why it's number one on that slide, it's the food. We have growing, hungry, active teenagers, and so really, really important, whether I was traveling with Canada Games teams or traveling internationally or anywhere really, locally, it's always about the food. So really important to know where the grocery stores are, where the good restaurants are, when they're going to eat, and of course what they're into. Some athletes are very picky and some aren't, so that was an important piece to make sure that we knew what was available and then when we could do that. Malaysia, we had a bit of a challenge with making sure the kids had to access to water. They certainly discouraged us from drinking the water out of the tap, so we had to make sure we had, and of course with the heat, we had to make sure we had copious amounts of bottled water. So Jonathan and I would make sure we would just have those 2-liter bottles accessible all the time for the kids. And there was even a point when we were discouraged from showering because the water wasn't so fantastic. So it's just really important to understand what the water situation is. Obviously, they need to be able to sleep and rest, and so roommates become an important piece, and so you're always making sure we do the best we can to make sure we've got the right people in the right rooms, but sometimes it doesn't work, so you have to shift so that people have the same sleeping patterns as well. For those of you who aren't aware, there's an individual event that happens prior to a team event in the Worlds, and so the individual event, there's a boys individual event and a girls individual event, and this is why we had so many athletes last year. Each country is allowed up to 6 males and 6 females to participate, and so we took the full contingent. And so we had a lot of matches, and it was very, very, very busy. So it was really important that the athletes knew when they were playing, where they were playing, and to let us know. And then when they weren't playing, we need to make sure the expectation is what the expectation is when they weren't playing. They were either, resting in their hotel room or getting food or not wandering aimlessly around a foreign country. So, and then at the evening of the team events, the individual event, we would regroup as a big team, and we would eat together and spend the evenings in together. So last year, obviously, it was the junior women's team event. So after the individuals were over, the boys left, and the girls who weren't on the team, they left. So 8 people left, and we were the four girls on the team remained. And so we had more opportunities because we played as a team. We had more opportunities to go off and see some things. But it's also it's a very important time to then sit down and reevaluate the goals with the team and decide who's playing that day or not, and who rests, and the expectations. And also during the team event, when the boys go home, it's a very different atmosphere. It's a lot of fun when the boys are there, let's be clear. But once the individuals are over, it's really tempting to sort of let your hair down, so to speak. But we had to kind of keep the team focused and make sure that they, remained in that good mindset and that good headspace after the individual event. The other piece of this too is the individual matches actually counted towards their ranking going into the team event. So all those individual matches were very, very important. What's the next slide there, Jeff? Oh, it's food. Yeah. So just a sampling of some of the food we encountered. We had street food in the top left, and on the bottom right was a market, and then restaurants. The top right was a Korean barbecue, which was a lot of fun. And the bottom left was in Penang. I'm not sure. There's still a lot of food. So making sure everybody was eating was really important, and hydrating, of course. So. Thank you. Next one. And again, we're still during the tournament. Going back, and the transportation is huge. The venues are awesome or the tournament organization is awesome because they always provide shuttles, but the daily shuttle schedules often changed. So we had to make sure we were well versed into when and where those buses or shuttles were leaving. And it was a funny phenomena when we were in Brazil because it was when the World Cup soccer was going on, and when Brazil played, nobody was driving any bus anywhere. So we had to make sure that if we were playing a match, we had to take an Uber to the venue when Brazil soccer was playing because the shuttles weren't running. So very important to stay in touch with your schedules. Of course, I was the manager of the teams in the world, so very important to maintain good communication with the championship office. They often had a mailbox that they would put mail in for you daily, or they'd send out updates through communication. We use WhatsApp a lot as our means of communication. So knowing what's going on in the venue was really, really important. The daily communication, of course, medical, where to find that, restringing, warm-up, all of those are taking place in the venue, and just to make sure that we knew where they were, and that the athletes had access to that. And of course, why we're there, coaching. Every athlete is different. They've had their own personal coach, and they've gotten to know, and we sort of get parachuted in, and making sure that we understand where they're coming from. Some athletes don't sit down during the 90 minutes or the 90 seconds in between games, or some athletes don't want to be spoken to at all. They just, so all of that is really important, and to make sure that it's positive, positive coaching all the way through. So the next picture, I think, is a picture of some of the so as I said, we had 12 athletes there in Malaysia, and so we're coaching the guys and the girls, and then we had an opportunity to play on the glass court, and then it's the Nicole David Center in Bukajali, and then you can see in the bottom right, there's also an opportunity for the kids to get experience working with the media, and so Molly Chadwick there is being interviewed and by the media, so that's always, we're coaching how to how to manage the media. Next slide, please. Still going on during the tournament, as I mentioned before, the individual and the team event. So it's really important that those matches during the individual event, they do count, because what happens after the individual event is a number of representatives, coaches, country representatives get together and look at all the head-to-heads, and then based on those head-to-heads put together a team ranking, and then there's an opportunity for appealing that if we don't agree. And then once that time frame for appealing is finished, then the team event begins, and we have to refocus for that next team event. And it has a very different atmosphere. As I said, half the group is gone, so it's different in that way, but it's also, we can kind of support each other in a way that doesn't necessarily happen in an individual event, because everyone's so busy. So, yeah, and again, accommodations, making sure that everybody's roommates are good, and laundry, that was sort of my job, making sure that everybody had enough clean laundry, so taking it back and forth. Figuring out at the opening and closing ceremonies who's the flag bearer, outfits, etc. Once the closing ceremonies happen at the end of the team event, you know, we don't want anyone to misrepresent Canada, so we absolutely make sure that they make good choices and they have fun, but they absolutely have to make good choices because they're still representing their country in some other countries. So that's pretty important. As I said, during the team event, we often had a morning or an afternoon where we didn't have any squash. So we want the kids to see what's in the host city. That's part of the whole experience, is to be able to see the world and appreciate that. So we had a couple opportunities to do some sightseeing, both in our training camp in Penang Pang, which is a little island off the coast of Malaysia. That was, and then when we were in Kuala Lumpur itself, even in New Zealand and Brazil, we had lots of opportunity to sightsee during the downtime. So really important. Per diems, just making sure we keep track of everybody's money. We wouldn't give it all to them all at once, because the currency is a little different. I was the keeper of the money, and so we just counted it out and make sure that they had what they needed, and if they didn't, then, you know, discussions around that. But didn't want to give it to them all at once, but certainly probably once every 5 or 6 days we'd make sure that they had what they needed, and then we just had to make sure that they signed off and kept track. So the next picture, I believe, is a picture of some of the sightseeing. So the top left is where the city of Penang, and that's where we held our training camp. And that's the same city where Nicole David grew up, and we actually trained in the venue where she learned how to play squash, which was pretty cool. And it was extremely hot. There was no air conditioning at all. And then on the bottom left, we rented Segways, and in the botanical gardens in Kuala Lumpur, we had an opportunity to go through. It was like a 3-hour tour. It was amazing. And nobody fell off. And then again in Kuala Lumpur, we went to the Batu Caves, and you can just about like 300 stairs up behind us there. So an opportunity. Whoops. And then the next slide, yeah, so obviously once the event is over and closing ceremonies have happened, then we got to go home. And sometimes athletes would meet up with parents and go off somewhere else, and sometimes one of the coaching staff would go off somewhere else, or parents would come and collect their kids. So really important that we have all of that communicated with parents, who's going where. Generally speaking, we all just simply get on a flight and go home, but not always. So that's pretty important to make sure that everybody's packed up and ready to go. And then of course the feedback, and we would give feedback obviously throughout, but in an informal way, but we gave them a formal, each athlete a formal feedback of areas to work on from what we could see to help, you know, when they go back and train with their personal coaches. And then they needed to give feedback to us as well. We needed to know how we did. I think we did okay. And then of course final reports for Squash Canada around all of those things: performances, expenses, and receipts. I feel like I talked really, really fast. And that's about it. There's one more slide at the end, but and that's our very last, after our very last match at the end of Malaysia. So I feel like I just ran a marathon, so if you have any questions, please. If you don't, that's fine too. So question away. And thank you, by the way, for listening.
How did the team do?
We came 9th last year. We were very disappointed. We lost a tough match to Australia, which was out of the 1 to 8 pool. So we ended up in the 9 to 16, I guess, and we came 9th. So
yeah, that match is always so key to get into the top 8. Otherwise, it's like such a slugfest.
Yeah, it is, and it really did come down to the last match, and I'm going to say the last game of the last match. It was that close. You know, and you always question your I often question the coaching decisions if it's like, do you rest that person or play that person? But in hindsight, you know, that's where we were really 9th, I think. But yeah.
Hi, Janet. Did you ever have to deal with someone like that had like a gluten intolerance or some kind of dietary restriction?
We've traveled with vegetarians or vegans, and so that was our biggest challenge, and very picky eaters. But generally speaking, these kids, they know themselves pretty well. But no, I've never traveled with someone with that challenge. The vegan challenge was one for sure, but they know their bodies and they know how to manage it pretty well. So.
Must have been tough to get the food timed right for everyone's matches and stuff like that.
Yeah, it was during the individuals where everybody's playing at such different times. It was just, I mean, we found out where the food courts, so to speak, were, and we just said, just go together and get some food and make sure, you know, they know themselves pretty well for the individual event, how soon they need to eat. Knock on wood, nobody on our team got sick. Other teams got sick. And we were very fortunate last year, but one girl was so sick, she was sent back to New Zealand. She was so sick. And whether it was the water or the food, I don't know, but we were very, very concerned about the water. So that was, and and just making sure we were eating things that were cooked.
Right.
So, the kids didn't venture too far in terms of their comfort level. They did what they felt comfortable with, and we weren't going to challenge them on that because obviously they're there to play squash. So after the event, of course, then they might have challenged themselves to eat something that's a little bit different. But yeah, they're old enough that they can go off on their own together, like in pairs or threes or fours, and then eat knowing when they were playing. But yeah, that first week is just crazy busy, trying to make sure that everybody's where they're supposed to be. And so we just stayed at the venue, and athletes came and went because there was so many matches. But
so there was only you and John to manage all 16 athletes, or you must have had parents?
Yeah, there's 12 athletes. There were a couple of parents. There was a dad. Actually, there was a few parents. But in terms of the teamness, we discouraged that. Again, the team unity. Parents know that well in advance before we even get on an airplane that this is the team. I can think back to an experience I had in the Netherlands where a parent took the child who was resting and said, "Oh, we're going sightseeing," and that was a no-no. Like, that shouldn't happen. The team is the team. So parents are very well versed into the expectation of their role when they're there. There's no question. We had a parent who could speak the language, Chinese. We went to a Chinese restaurant. That was very, very helpful. So it was great. But in terms of, we wanted to make sure we were a team, so the parents were very aware of that. I don't know if that makes sense, but they just didn't take them off. They did when they could, but they were also very aware that we needed to keep sort of a handle on some of that.
Right on. Thank you.
Janet, can you hear me? It's Sam.
Hi, Sam.
Hey, I was wondering about the feedback process. When people, so I'm assuming when you were providing feedback for players, you just email it directly to them. But when they're providing feedback for you, I was wondering what the process is for that. I'm just curious.
I never actually got direct feedback. I'm assuming, maybe Jeff can correct me on this one, it went to Squash Canada.
I see. Okay, so it's through Squash Canada.
Yeah, and I know that Squash Canada also got copies of what we gave athletes, and I'm hoping athletes gave it to their coaches as well. It's a tricky thing to travel with them, in the sense of, you're other people's children, but you're not their personal coach. So you have what you have, and you coach with that. But you see things, right? I mean, everybody will see things of athletes that, so it's just feedback, suggestions, but
cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Jeff, did you guys get feedback from athletes?
I can't. I myself can't speak to that because I'm not. Unfortunately, I'm not in charge of the high performance program. So to truthfully answer that question, I don't have an answer.
Okay. Dan probably would.
Correct. Other questions? Anybody else have other questions?
Janet, it's Ray. Just a quick question in terms of the individual event. When you took that many athletes for the individuals, was the team selected before it left, like the 4 players who were staying on for the team event, or was it based on the 4 best finishes and those 4 people were going to stay on for the team event?
That's a good question. No, the team was already selected before we left the country. So there was a lot of criteria that happened over it. It's changed. It was a 2-year process. Now it's a 1-year process in order for them to earn the team selection. So all of that was done before we left. So.
Okay, and then basically when we go into that meeting, the team meeting, to decide the final rankings for the team event at Worlds, were those 4 players who were pre-selected then taken into consideration their finishes, or did they take into consideration the 6 players overall that would play?
No, just the 4.
Just the 4. Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe Janet, a question, since we have the pleasure of having one of our top players in the country on this call. Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, you were part of a couple of World Junior teams, if I recall, on top of all of your other international experience. Do you by any chance recall the selection criteria, not specifics, but was it a 1-year, 2-year process when you would have been part of juniors back in the day?
I don't remember. I think it was a 1-year process, but I've just because I've been doing a bit of coaching, I've been watching it evolve over the years to points and whatnot. I think it was head-to-head at the time that I was doing it. And I don't remember the selection process being super easy for the coaches and the high performance teams. So I think they moved to points to try and make it more clear cut and tangible for people to try and achieve, a goal over the course of the year or 2-year cycle. So yeah, I can't remember exactly, but I think it was head-to-heads.
Great.
Yeah, and I think it was a 2-year cycle up until, I'm going to say, coming into the next round, but it's now going to be a 1-year cycle. And then it is points based on tournaments you enter, and you're given 6 or 7 tournaments in which to enter, and you must enter 4 of them. And I'm Jeff, you can correct me on this, but there's a certain amount of tournaments that they have to do, and that but it does give leeway because you'll have people all across the country, and of course it becomes a time consumption as well as a financial burden to be traveling all over the place. So there is a little bit of latitude in terms of which tournaments are mandatory. I know the nationals are mandatory, and one other one, and then there's 2 more that they have to do out of the 7 that are out there. So there's a little bit of leeway, but yeah, just to go back to the initial question, the team is definitely selected through that process before we leave the country.
Yeah, I seem to remember it was a 2-year process where you had, which the second year was more important than the first, and you had 2 core events, one in the West, one in the East, and then nationals.
Yeah, and that's changing, or it's evolving into something that's a little bit more manageable and a little, as Sam said, a little bit more cut and dry with points. But
Any other questions? Anyone else with questions? Anything at all?
Hi, Janet. It's Maxim. Just a question. How do you what did you did when you had 3 or 4 players playing at the same time? Did you add a process where you prioritize the main draw player, or?
Yeah, well, when it comes to the guys and the girls, because this was a junior girls team event, junior women's team event, we prioritized the girls that were on the team first, and then it sort of fell from there. So we would make sure that they were coached, and then we would encourage somebody who wasn't playing to go make sure they were coaching somebody else, and kind of fill us in. So yeah, sometimes we were sitting behind 2 courts at the same time, but the team was definitely prioritized.
Okay, thanks.
Can I ask about the same subject? How did you communicate that? And when to all the players? For the individual event, we just sat them down and said, "This is how it's going to go," and the boys were totally cool with that. I mean, and they had their own individual goals, and they were, so we were supporting them. But no, that was communicated right from the get-go.
Got it. On site.
On site. Yeah. In the training camps before,
Did any of the individual athletes bring their own personal coaches?
They're not allowed to, I don't think, but correct me if I'm wrong. There was one male, somebody in the who brought his dad, and his dad coached him, and that was communicated to us that that's how that was going to go. So we actually never coached that young man. But the parents that were there were supportive, not coaching, other than that one fellow. But I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, but I don't think the personal coaches are allowed to do that. But
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm not 100% confident, but because I'm not overseeing the high performance program, but based off my understanding from conversations in the office, yes, that is correct, but I could be wrong.
And we communicated with personal coaches before we left to say, you know, can you give us some more insight or information if we had a question? Like that communication was clear before we left. So we, you know, it was, yeah, two-way street there. And then even while we were there, there might have been an odd time to communicate back to Canada to a coach to say, so this is something, have you discovered, you know, if something came up that we'd never sort of realized before, that we would go back to the coach and ask for, you know, some advice or some information. So it was pretty open two-way communication there.
Janet, a question for you. With the junior women's teams, well, with the team events in general, basically each encounter is 3 players of the 4. How did you, can you speak to how you and Jonathan determined which 3 girls would play each encounters, and how you would communicate that with the 4 girls as a whole, as a team, to kind of relay that message and make sure everybody was comfortable with your decision?
Yeah, that's a great question. So during the team event, we would decide in the morning of our encounter. We would see how they slept and see how they were feeling. We wouldn't make any decisions the night before, and we would speak to them and just kind of get a read on, okay, how are you feeling? And someone's feeling tired, we're like, okay, and we would gather that information, and then we would send them away, and then Jonathan and I would sit and chat. And then we'd make a decision, because we had up until, if our encounter was at noon, we had until 11 to change the order. And so by 11, you know, 10:59, we could send in our order, but we would communicate that before to our athletes. And generally speaking, nobody had an issue in Malaysia about that way of handling it. So we got a read on the athletes in the morning. If someone wasn't feeling well, then, or was tired or whatever, then we would make a decision and then put the order in. And we would do that every single morning.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from anybody on the call?
Yeah, hi, Janet.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, how's it going? What did you know? What did you notice about some of the other countries and their style of coaching, and or just how they ran their teams? And did you learn anything in terms of what you might want to do differently next time, just from your experience?
It was a little bit challenging to know how they were coaching, but let's be clear, the Egyptians had everybody there. For every athlete, they probably had 2 coaches. So there's a big entourage from Egypt, lots and lots of people. So it was, you know, it was a little challenging to notice because we were so involved in our own team. And then when we had downtime, we weren't at the venue. So I didn't really pick up on too much, other than the fact that there was a lot of Egyptians around, a lot of athletes. But yeah, sorry, that not much help there.
No, so there's nothing you would learn that you would want to do differently in terms of the setup of the team and how you go about things.
What do you mean, the setup? Like?
Well, just, is there anything you'd want to do differently next World Juniors as a team? any in the processes?
Oh, well, I mean, I think the
I don't
training.
know if my question's clear.
Well, it's a good question. I think having the training camp prior to close to the venue was good. The 2 times that we did it in Canada and then went to the venue, it had more challenges. So the fact that we were able to do a training camp prior to in the same country made a big difference. And then we did see this, like the Swiss team was at the same venue we were for our training camp, and there was a few other teams as well. So that piece was kind of nice. So I would definitely do it in the host country rather than in our own country and then leave. But we didn't really notice too much. I mean, other than obviously Malaysia it was their home court, so they were very comfortable there, but didn't really notice a difference, I guess, in that way, because I wasn't really focused on other teams, trying to keep my head above water with our team.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Janet, maybe another question. Just you could speak to the coaching relationship and rapport that you and Jonathan had, and just how you guys went about making things work, good, bad, the ugly, everything in between.
I'm not going to throw Jonathan under the bus. Well, Jonathan likes his food, so that was very important. We absolutely needed to make sure we had good places to eat. No, it was, you do learn lots about other people when you're traveling, and you have to be open-minded. Of course, you're organizing, you're facilitating, you're managing, you're communicating, but you're also making sure everybody's needs are met. And that includes my needs and Jonathan's needs as well. So I first worked with Jonathan at the Pan Ams in Toronto last June, and which was awesome that we had the same group of girls play in the Pan Ams, and then we coached them again in Malaysia. And wow, that made a big difference. I would recommend that if that could happen again. But no, just understanding, we sort of figured out our roles early in Toronto, and then when we got to Malaysia, we had a better sense of what each of us were about. So it's, and I would make sure that things got covered if he wasn't thinking about it, or vice versa. He was, he had things to do, so I would make sure, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but we sort of began to figure out what was needed, and then we just made sure it happened. But there's no question that communication was key. I mean, setting up a WhatsApp group chat with the team, really, really important. We had some fun, let's be clear. We had to make sure there was some levity. We can't all be serious. So it was, there was some good funny moments, playing some very silly games at restaurants, embarrassing people. But, so keeping it light when it was important and appropriate, and then having it serious when it's time to play. It was a really good balance that way. Jonathan, I've worked with a number of different coaches, Matt Siridiak in Brazil and Richard Yandel in some other places. And, everybody works really hard to make sure it works. So I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it's great. Thank you. Any other questions from anybody on the call? Okay, I'm going to take that as no additional questions. So I would just like to take this opportunity to thank Janet for her wonderful presentation, and everybody for your questions and taking the time to join us on today's webinar. Just a couple of little things. I will update your coach profile this afternoon, and it should appear. This webinar should appear in your profile by the end of the week once the CAC approves, to reward you with a PD point towards your maintenance certification. For those who haven't been on any of the other calls, we still have 3 webinars lined up for the rest of this season. Tuesday, April 21st at noon, Martin Heath is doing the Egyptian Open game style. Thursday, April 30th at noon, Dave Howard is doing Understanding Officiating for Coaches. And then Martin finishes things off on Wednesday, May 20th at noon with Developing High Performance Habits. So I encourage you to register for those last 3 sessions and get PD points towards your maintenance certification. Otherwise, if you have any other questions that you think of after this webinar, don't hesitate to reach out. We can connect you with Janet, and she is happy to answer anything after the call is done.
Okay, thank you, Jeff, and thank you everyone for listening. But yeah, feel free to touch base if you have any other questions. I'm still learning, so appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye. Have a great day.
Thanks, Janet.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe.
Hi, thank you.